afternoon, everybody. Let me go ahead and welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us, those of you in the public, those of you here at the board, at the commission. I want to go ahead and begin the June 19th regular meeting of the Commission to End Homelessness with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to go ahead and have our Vice Chair, Commissioner Tuan, if he'll please lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Before I begin, so today is a important day in our American history as well. Today is Juneteenth, and I just want us to take a moment to reflect on that. So, I want us to remember that today commemorates the emancipation of enslaved African Americans in the U.S., marking the day in 1865 when the last enslaved people in Texas were informed of their freedom. Juneteenth is a day to celebrate freedom, reflect on our history, and honor the enduring contributions of Black Americans to our nation. But we also, realize that we do the celebrating in some shadows of news that's not so great with our Black community here in Orange County. Even though the numbers have diminished, there was a very healthy Black community in Orange County and especially in Santa Ana. They lived on the west end of town. There was a large, thriving Black community led by Helen Shipp, who was the first person to start the Black History Parade in Santa Ana. Now it resides in Anaheim, so we want to thank Anaheim for being a host city for that. But we've had some, great people that have come out from Santa Ana and Orange County to lead the Black community in many, different areas. And one of them is Milton Grimes. He's a civil rights leader. I'm not sure if many of you know of him, but he came up with some groundbreaking civil rights cases. One of them was a postpartum case and showed that women who gave birth had chemical changes and sometimes caused them to do things that were made them victims of that chemical imbalance that they went through. In any event, he and Jerry Spence were very close, and that was something here in Santa Ana. He was one of my mentors, so I wanted to remember him. But I also want to call attention to the fact that now the Black community makes up only 2% of our county, but yet they're about 70% of the hate crime cases that are brought to light. And so that's something that we need to work on. I know that the DA's office, I'm sure, is familiar with those statistics. We certainly are cognizant of that. We want to make sure that we continue to improve. But I think today is one of those days that we want to reflect. But, let's do some good work here today for all our community and make sure that we reflect on the meaning of Juneteenth. And so let me go into a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. So today, the agenda contains a brief general description of each item to be considered. Except as provided by law, no action shall be taken on any item not appearing on the agenda. The Commission to End Homelessness encourages public participation. If you wish to speak on any item appearing on the agenda during the general public comments, please complete a speaker request form and turn it in to the clerk prior to the reading of the item. Speakers will be given up to 3 minutes to speak. The clerk will run the timer and announce when your time is up. The public may comment also submitting electronically by emailing response@ocgov.com. And with that, we will move on to the roll call. And Madam Clerk, if you'll please call roll.
Thank you. Please indicate your presence when I call your name. Commissioner Sarmiento?
Here.
Commissioner Wagner? Commissioner Vanderpool? Commissioner Kim? Commissioner Rose? Here. Commissioner Parks? Here. Commissioner Hawley?
Here.
Commissioner Dimitropoulos? Here. Commissioner Hurst?
Here.
Commissioner Tuan?
Here.
Commissioner Davis? Here. Commissioner Ivins? Here. Commissioner Spitzer?
Susie Price on his behalf.
Thank you. Commissioner Cunningham?
Here.
Commissioner Afable? Commissioner Wyatt? Commissioner Peineman. Commissioner Bruno Nelson. Commissioner Rios Faust. Commissioner Morse. And thank you, Chairman. We do have a quorum.
Great, thank you for that, Madam Clerk. Let me go ahead and continue with some other quick comments. As a reminder, please be aware that the room is hot mic'd for live streaming of the meeting. Additional microphones are placed on the table in front of you. Commissioners, please speak into the microphones so it may pick up all of your comments for the live stream. Please try to keep side conversations to a minimum, as they may be picked up by the microphones throughout the room. And we're going to go ahead and, before we move on to public comment, I just want to recognize some, all of our members of the public are esteemed guests, but especially some that are visiting us here today. First, from the City of Fountain Valley, Councilmember Patrick Harper. Thank you, Councilmember Harper, for coming and joining us. We also have the former city manager from Santa Ana, Raul Godinez. So thank you, Raul, for being with us here today, as well as the former Public Works Director from Santa Ana, Fuad Suisse, and our good friend Mario Rodriguez. So thank you all for coming and joining us. So at this time, we'll go ahead and take public comment from any members of the public wishing to speak on any non-agenda topics that are under the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission. Madam Clerk, do we have any requests from the public to speak?
Not under the general public comments, no.
Great, thank you. So we'll now move on to the agenda items for today's meeting, and we'll begin with the discussion items. So, Madam Clerk, if you'll please read the first item.
Item 1 is the Office of Care Coordination update, which includes updates on the tiny homes ad hoc and the homeless prevention and stabilization pilot program. And we have one request from the public to speak on this item. Ken Bear.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Bear. I've been working in county for a few years. I looked into the manufacturers of the tiny homes of the sites that you visited. I'd like to advocate on behalf of LifeArc. I think they're the only ones that are manufactured in California, and their units meet standards for permanent supportive housing. I think it's important going forward, any sort of construction should be for permanent supportive housing that is earmarked for homelessness. There's issues with the vouchers, where competing with the market where non-homeless individuals are competing for those same units. The landlords, I've seen them either mark their prices just above so they don't get vouchers, or they will try and take the maximum, which it puts a burden on non-homeless individuals, people without vouchers who are trying to get these units as well. And also, additionally, any permanent supportive housing for homeless individuals frees up interim shelter beds. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
And we have no further comments.
Great, thank you. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Doug Beck so he can provide us some information on this item.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the June 2024 Commission 10 Homelessness meeting. So like with many of our meetings, we start off with an update from the Office of Care Coordination, and we're going to cover two items in this update today. The first is a brief update on our tiny home ad hoc. As you can see up here, we just for reference have listed the members of the commission that are a part of the ad hoc. Our goal has been, the ad hoc's goal has been to really understand and study different tiny home models, get a real understanding of how different communities are applying them. And we're excited. We've visited over a half a dozen tiny home sites in the last 2 months. We've spoken to several dozen tiny home developers, operators, local governments that fund them, different funders, people that are living in them or who have lived in them. And we've gotten as a group a really great understanding of all of the different models, applications that are considered when under this larger tiny home umbrella term. The ad hoc will be coming back, as we've spoken previously, in our August meeting with a formal report. And we're excited about this formal report. It's going to not only state what we've learned, what the ad hoc has learned, but also findings, recommendations, and hopefully provide this commission and our community a really helpful basic framework to utilize and reference as we continue to consider and understand different applications of tiny homes in our community. As you can see up here, just to reference a few of the places we've met with LifeArc, which was mentioned by the public speaker, Continents, 2 sites in Baldwin Park that CityNet operates, a site in Anaheim, Limb Living in Anaheim, and just yesterday the ad hoc group went to the city of Torrance to see their tiny home temporary housing. Second update that I'd like to provide is around the homeless prevention and stabilization pilot program. So for those of you who have attended the commission meetings, these last couple of meetings are aware that the homeless prevention and stabilization pilot program seeks to assist households who are at risk of experiencing homelessness achieve housing stability. It's really a pilot that we're excited about that fits squarely in our prevention pillar. This has been an effort over really the last year, and we're at an exciting point at this moment. So back in April, the Office of Care Coordination released a request for proposal for operators of the homeless prevention and stabilization pilot program. And in the last couple of weeks, not only has the RFP closed, the RFP review panel evaluation panel has met, and we are very close to finalizing the contract with Orange County United Way to operate our homeless prevention and stabilization pilot program. Additionally, the UCI has entered into a contract with the county to evaluate and study the effectiveness of this program. So we're really excited. I think timeline-wise, we're probably looking at mid-August for the program to start taking applications. Feels like a good update. In 2 months when we come back in August, I'd imagine we'd have another substantial sort of update to give the group. And with that, I'll pass it back to the chair.
Thank you for that, Doug. And you know, before we leave both of these, I just wanted to, number one, say thank you to all of you here at the commission, because I think these 2 efforts and these 2 initiatives and concepts were kind of born here. So we are very happy to see them move along, and we're excited about the work with United Way, the prospective work coming along. We know that they have capacity. They have scale to be able to meet this. It's not going to be a large sample size. We're talking about maybe 200 families, but nonetheless, it'll give us a good enough read of whether or not this is going to be a successful effort. And obviously, the study and the evaluation from UCI will let us know that. And it's always good to have programs and be able to analyze the metrics and make sure that we're on the right path. Going back to the tiny homes, I just wanted to thank the ad hoc for all your work that you've done visiting the different sites, both sites that are already been implemented and operating, but also with the manufacturers, just to see what the product is like out there. And really, this was also born out of discussions here, because we, all of us have seen that building permanent supportive housing units take a very long time and are very expensive, but we know that's something that we have to continue doing. But in the interim, this may provide a phase in that continuum of housing where we can provide somebody with a unit that may allow them to leave a shelter or navigation center, be there for a while as they're more permanent supportive housing units being constructed. So we just think that this might be another piece of that continuum. So I wanted to open the floor. If I know we have some friends, like I said, our former Public Works Director and City Manager. Would you like to provide public comment on this? Because I know you're in this industry, either Mr. Suisse, and you can go up to the mic, or City Manager Godinez. Anything you want to share on this idea before we leave it?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Supervisor Sarmiento, for inviting us today and to see the work that you've doing. I've looked at the agenda. I did some homework before coming here. I live in the Bay Area, and I came specifically to meet with the supervisor and speak briefly here. So, just to give you some background, and I'm not bragging, I just want to say I started my career as a construction inspector in Oakland. I moved to become manager for the engineering department in Oakland. Then I was hired as city engineer for San Francisco. Our San Francisco's capital improvement program is about 32 billion. We used to complete anywhere between 3 to 5 billion worth of projects every year. Then I moved to Southern California and worked here in Santa Ana for 2 years as Director of Public Works. I've completed big and small projects. Some of the large projects, like the San Francisco General Hospital, $1 billion. Nothing has impacted my life or changed my life more than a project that I built in Santa Ana, which was a homeless shelter with 200 beds that we completed in 28 days. And at that time, Raul was the city manager, and he can speak more about this project. But truly, this impacted the community, and it impacted me forever. I celebrated my 60th birthday, not with my family, actually at the homeless shelter with the staff and the people that built the project. And the reason I say this, because I want to commend you on what you're doing. Honestly, you have so many resources, you have experience, you have what it takes to make a difference in the lives of those who don't have what it takes to do it. So I commend you. And what I want to say is, after retiring from my position here in Santa Ana, I started a company to focus on modular construction. And since then, in the last 4 years, Raul and I, started this company. We've completed many projects for the U.S. Navy in Guam, for the city of New York. We have a project in Djibouti, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we're looking at the benefits and the time savings and cost savings of using modular technologies, whether tiny homes or any other homes, in accelerating providing the services that you are about to provide, or that you're working on providing, and in accomplishing and reaching your mission and vision in providing homes for all those people in our communities that don't have the means to do that. So we will be at your service. We'll be happy to work with you. We will be happy to volunteer and provide you with consultation and advice in anything we can do. I will leave my contact information with Visalia, who works for Supervisor Sarmiento. And again, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak and present here. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Fuad. So they set the bar very high. 28 days to stand up a shelter is no small feat. And I was council member during that time. It was in my ward, and so we had a willing property owner who without that you can't do any of this. But to stand something like that up was something that at that time, years ago, when there weren't many navigation centers, there weren't many shelters, that was one of the first in the county. So it was sort of an exploratory, first look. So it was very novel. But now we have a network, and we just stood up on the easel something that shows the navigation centers and shelters throughout the county. And I think that's something for us to continue to have here, just because we've come so far from that one moment when we just had one. And so now we have several, with several beds, actually, over 1,000, right? Beds now in the county. So we're in a much different place than we were back when the link was set up and stood up. So it's good for us to see how far we've come. We still have a ways to go, but it's good to see that we now have, a network of support throughout the county. So thank you for that. With that, I'll go ahead and ask the clerk to go ahead and read the next item. Thank you for. Unless there's any comments from the, are there any comments from the commission on either of the two items, on the tiny homes or on the stabilization program? Commissioner White.
I just want to follow up on one of your comments. It's basically a reminder that this tiny homes is a phase in a thing. That is, we can't take the pressure off of housing. Ultimately, more housing to permanent solutions are needed. And so we communicate so poorly across the county at times, and we set up shelters and we think they're the end game, or we set up tiny homes and we look at them as the end games. Neither are the end, right? We really have to continue to put the program together to include all of these, and we have to communicate that really broadly and consistently to get the buy-in and support we need to move on this. Thank you.
Excellent point. All these things, I think, are on parallel paths, right? You have navigation centers, you have, hopefully these, transitional, housing units, but you also have the permanent supportive. So this isn't to supplant or to do something instead of, it's to have them done concurrently. But as we're building out those permanent supportive units, this may be a phase that could help people transition out of centers, because as you saw in the, in some of the remarks that Doug has made to us, there are many people in navigation centers and shelters ready to leave. We just don't have enough placements to put them in. So this may help us solve that problem, that bottleneck that's being created. So any other comments? Yes, Commissioner Parks.
Yes, and Chairman, I just want to say thank you for moving so quickly in terms of bringing a prevention program to the community. I think about when we had the University of San Francisco study reviewed, and about learning some of the things that the participants have shared about how much prevention would have stopped their homelessness. So again, thank you, and we're excited to be partners with you on this. So again, I just want to thank you, and excited about the tiny homes too. So.
Thank you for that. Seeing no other comments, we'll go ahead and turn it over to the clerk for the next item.
Item number 2 is the cold weather emergency shelter ad hoc recommendations, and we have no requests from the public to speak on this item.
Great, thank you for that. Let me go ahead and just, once again, just kind of before I kick it off to Doug to give us some details, I want to thank members of the ad hoc for the cold weather shelter. So this is kind of a departure from what the cold weather shelter in the past has been. Before, many of you will recall, and we were just chatting with the former city manager here in Santa Ana, the traditional way of approaching or dealing with cold weather shelters in the past were the two armories that we had in the county, the one in Fullerton and the one in Santa Ana. So it was mostly the one in Santa Ana that was stood up and open during cold weather events, and we would have, I think, maybe 200 beds, 250 beds there. But people were brought in throughout the county for services and for shelter during that time. But what we've realized is that the model has changed, because there are now so many other navigation centers and shelters throughout the county that it is kind of clumsy to bring somebody from the southern spa up to maybe a northern spa or central spa site. That we can hopefully look at activating some of these partners that we have and not burdening one city, because a lot of what we heard throughout the discussion is, and as former mayor of Santa Ana, I remember the city pushing back pretty hard against it being designated as a site for the cold weather shelter, was that this should be a shared responsibility amongst all 34 cities in our county. And I think that if all of us lean in, even with a small share, we can help this problem and we can address it better. And that's really what the whole idea is here, is maybe to decentralize this, work with our cities, work with our partners. The case study and what we did in Anaheim, working with their faith-based partners there, is maybe a model that we can use throughout the county. There are a network of faith-based sites throughout the county that might be able to provide us those resources. And again, we wanted to move away from just defining it as cold weather, because we realize that people are in crisis when it comes to extreme weather. So it could be extreme heat in our part of the state where people experience dehydration, heat stroke when they're out in the open, when it exceeds the national weather standards of an extreme weather condition. So we want to move away maybe from looking at just cold weather and looking at inclement weather and extreme weather conditions. So this is something that the ad hoc has worked really hard on, looking at how do we use our partners and work with our partners and support our partners, and see how we can find a way of networking this and not making it so difficult for one city to shoulder, but also just making sure that we have support provided to those that can partner with us. And that's kind of the concept. And so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Doug to kind of give us a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Supervisor. So the cold weather shelter ad hoc. This ad hoc, this iteration of the ad hoc has met a few times now, and today what I'll be doing is I'll be presenting on those recommendations, and then I'll open it to the up to those to the ad hoc members to provide context, detail, conversation. To give a little bit of context and to add on to the supervisor's context, last year, a cold weather shelter ad hoc met as well, and really looking at trying to understand what's the best route forward for the cold weather shelter in 23-24. And as many of you know that have been a part of this community for quite some time, the cold weather shelter, A, it's important, but B, it's a sticky issue. There's I could say, from my personal involvement of this, there's very few things that everybody sort of agrees upon other than the need for it. So these are tough, and I highlight this because it's a tough topic to discuss, and bringing the ad hoc group together and having a discussion. I really appreciate the openness, the candidness, the willingness to, share views and come together on recommendations is really appreciated in this exercise specifically because of the nature of how challenging, coming to a consensus on this particular topic. So, like we try to do always, we put up the members of the ad hoc just so everyone's familiar, provide a little bit of context. The purpose of the ad hoc, as I briefly mentioned, is really to evaluate the various models of design and operations that could be recommended to the full commission. That is and was our task. Really thinking about when we entered into this, and the reason we started out calling it a cold weather emergency shelter ad hoc is because we're thinking about 24-25. The ad hoc was created, I believe, at our February meeting. Clearly, at that time, we're still in, the cold weather season for 23-24. But one of the learned lessons we've had over the years is that this is a discussion that has to happen year-round and early, so that wherever we end up going, we have time to go there in an effective and collaborative way. So before I get to the recommendations, I just want to remind folks of some of the things that we presented on last time, which is around some of the learned lessons or some of the discussion we had that led us up to the recommendations you'll see in a minute. So and the supervisor provided a lot of good context, and what I want to build upon is this last year. Going in the fall of 2023, at the recommendation of the ad hoc and the commission, our office sent out a letter to all 34 mayors CCing their city managers in a real effort to reach out to those cities and explore options that they would be willing to partner on, and B, trying to achieve and move away from a centralized response. Really trying to communicate that we are open to supporting and partnering around the regional or a community-based response. And we heard feedback from several cities, and then ultimately, as many of you know, we were able to support the city of Anaheim's cold weather shelter. Excuse me. But one of the challenges was that the conversation started a little later than we all would have ideally liked, and there was some things that we learned there. You know, the short timeline was challenging. This also, Anaheim used a activation-based model. So this is the first time where we supported a model or participated in a model where a shelter wasn't open every single night during its activation, regardless of the weather, but instead trying an approach that was an activation-based approach, understanding that, especially now that we have so many year-round shelters, the cold weather emergency shelter is really a response to providing immediate shelter for those that are seeking it during inclement weather, dangerous weather. So by activating it during that dangerous weather, we were achieving that. Commissioner Vanderpool was really helpful in providing some insight and learned lessons through his exercise. And I think you'll see, and we'll point out as we move forward, where those learned lessons come into our recommendations. So looking at our recommendations, the ad hoc recommends recognizing the need for a response for various inclement weather patterns and not only cold weather. So the supervisor introduced this. I mentioned it a few times already, but really an understanding that exactly what it says, that cold weather shelter doesn't necessarily capture exactly what we're trying to achieve and or the purpose of the cold weather shelter. It's somewhat restrictive, that there is a need for emergency shelter around inclement weather. And there's a recommendation of recognizing that, and whatever approach is taken to be taken in consideration of a year-round approach. The ad hoc also recommends proactive planning ahead of inclement weather to encourage those who are in high-risk areas to be placed into shelter before the weather turns. Many of you remember back in August, we had Hurricane Hillary come through, and a good amount of the discussion in the ad hoc group was around a lot of the work that the county and the cities did in preparation to it and the learned lessons. And also Commissioner Vanderpool speaking about how much the outreach teams in his city, his police department, the year-round shelters in his city play such an important role in providing shelter and sort of limiting the need for, or the amount of people that when that weather hits, they're in need of shelter, and how important it is, especially since we have year-round resources, to ensure that your outreach teams, your police departments, your shelters are doing their best to ensure that people are getting in before it's an emergency. The ad hoc also recommends communicating with each individual city directly, while also considering functionality, efforts, and participation of each SPA. So this was, I guess, for lack of a better word, in response to, or in, as we were thinking about, okay, do we send out another letter? And the group unanimously agreed, the first letter achieved its purpose, and really moving forward when trying to partner with cities or communicate with cities, the value of sitting with them one-on-one or as a region, is so incredibly important, and doing so in a way that, fosters partnership and comfort and willingness to communicate freely and openly. The ad hoc recommends leveraging shelter network by considering set-aside beds at existing locations for times of inclement weather. So the county piloted a protocol this last winter that essentially ensures that any unutilized shelter beds that are available when this weather hits or as this weather is coming up, excuse me, that there any sort of wait list or barriers to entry or time frames created for intake were alleviated, so that essentially if there's an open bed and someone comes across someone, an outreach worker or a sheriff comes across an individual that needs a bed, all they need to do is check if there's a bed, make sure they hit the very minimum qualifications, and that person can utilize it. And we found that as a very effective model, and it's something that the ad hoc sees as another layer to responding to inclement weather. Additionally, utilizing and expanding partnerships to address the shared responsibility between counties and cities. So, exactly what it says there, the importance of not only partnering and creating dialogue, but really centering that around the shared responsibility and not, an unfair onus on one side or the other. I can speak from the county's perspective around the model with Anaheim. It's really been a pleasure to work with the city of Anaheim in their cold weather shelter over the last year. Both groups bringing resources to the table, working together when operational challenges, arose, and instead of sort of getting into any type of, territorial battle or focusing on the problem, really it was a nice exercise in focusing on solutions and just moving forward and being strong partners. The county should also be prepared to work collaboratively, including committing to lowering challenges with partnerships by revisiting conditions in contracts and agreements. This was something we've discussed the last two meetings. Commissioner Vanderpool brought up some of the challenges around the sort of contracting and expectations in our agreement, especially based on sort of the quick and short time frame we worked around. So this is something that, the ad hoc, the county commits to working on, and the ad hoc really wants to enforce that. Another recommendation is the county and cities explore the use of motel rooms as a potential model. I think this recommendation's one that is highly considering not just moving to an all motel rooms approach, but really having the flexibility during that time for the most sort of vulnerable, and whether it's seniors or transition age youth or really vulnerable populations that at that moment need a place to go, and there might not be an opportunity to consider the ability to work on motel rooms. Also, a recommendation of developing a reference of best practices surrounding inclement weather. So essentially codifying some of the best practices we've learned and ensure that we're sharing that and we're incorporating and learning from those as we move forward. And then finally, there's a recommendation of reviewing a case study of Anaheim's most recent inclement weather operation, having the city of Anaheim and the County of Orange work together to really create a case study that provides a concrete example of a potential way to roll out an inclement weather response, and an example of how a partnership between a city and a county might look in those circumstances. So with that, I'll pass it back to the chair and also open it up to any of the ad hoc members.
Yeah, thank you for that background, Doug, in the presentation. So I'll bring it back to the commission for comments. I forgot to mention something at the front end. We're very happy to be at the ribbon cutting for the Central Cities Navigation Center. So we want to give big props to Commissioner Kim and her team over at Garden Grove, but also partners from Fountain Valley and Westminster. It was a beautiful site. It's going to be another piece of this complex puzzle that we're putting together to make sure that people have places to be and safe places to shelter in. So with that, let me go ahead and bring it back to the commission for comments on this item. Commissioner Wyatt?
I know Doug asked for the ad hoc committee members, which I'm not one, but if agreement, I do have some comments.
Sure, please.
Okay. I agree with anytime there's an emergency that's a threat to the people. I mean, basically the shelters these emergency shelters or cold weather shelters, as we've called them, are primarily dealing with people who prefer not to be in the shelter generally, but when circumstances really like cold weather or, as you said, extreme heat or what other circumstances occur, feel like they're will need to be there because it's life threatening. But however we set them up, I think that missing the opportunity when we shelter these people to work with them, to take that opportunity while we have them, to see what we can do to better help them, to change their situation so they're not on the street or that isn't their preference anymore, to see how to overcome that is a key part, and we should be set up well in all of these to do that. The comment on here about using motels and other rooms, I think is valid, especially when you get to, as we look at across our 34 cities, most of us, are spread. We're small cities, and so the numbers are small. But we need outreach workers. That is, there needs to be a service provided along with the shelter to meet with them, to work with them, again, to take this opportunity. As we look at rolling this out, I don't think we can wait until it's time to shelter somebody to introduce the outreach worker to the hotel or motel management. I think we need proactively to have worked out a plan, met the outreach workers so that they would know how to reach them and know how to service them and so forth to reduce that, and so that implementation could be made smooth and seamlessly to do that. And along with that, I presented some ideas to Doug last winter that we really didn't flesh out completely. But I think where we can look to the cities to chip in if we work with them on how the funding works, if we can if we can increase their outreach funding during some of these so that they can have those outreach workers available to work with people when they need shelter so that we never leave them. I mean, I would ideally, every day sheltered, there should be a meeting with an outreach worker to just go through them. What do we need? What's the situation? What can we do to move things forward? So I think if we explore those opportunities to increase some of the outreach capabilities of the cities, then they could deal with finding ways to have more distributed shelter beds available and still provide the service needed to make that an effective shelter. So I think those are all ideas that we should look into.
Great comments. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kim?
Thank you, Chair Sarmiento and Commissioner White. Those are wonderful comments. And on behalf of the City of Garden Grove, we do take delivering our homeless resources to heart. In terms of street outreach, our Garden Grove Police Department has a special resources team that's staffed by a sergeant and 6 officers that also in support with our B-Wall team, which is an 18-hour deployment, 7-day a week of street outreach to our Garden Grove community. In addition, we're collaborating with Commissioner Bruno Nelson and Cal Optima and Healthcare in Action, where we're providing medical services and primary care support to our unhoused population in the city of Garden Grove. And from what I understand, through that pilot program that launched a year ago, April, is now rolled out in 2 additional cities. So for us, I think this conversation is actually quite profound in all these resources. It's not one size fits all, but I take great pride in learning from each of our commissioners and their feedback for us to continue to deliver the services to our unhoused population. And thank you, Chair Sarmiento. Our Central Cities Navigation Center, the Tri-Cities Navigation Center is open officially for 2 weeks, and we have been able to shelter 19 individuals among the 3 cities. So our goal is to achieve our 100% occupancy of 85 shelter beds being fully utilized. So we're making incremental progress, and I do agree with Doug and his overview of the recommendations as it relates to cold weather shelter. You know, our goal is to deliver the services now and have those relationships so that when they are ready, and it takes, from what I understand, multiple touch points, but when our individual Garden Grove residents, Fountain Valley residents, Westminster residents are willing to receive services, we have those shelter beds for them. And in addition, we're working with Cal Altima to transition to a phase 2 of their street outreach medicine program, which will provide additional shelter and permanent housing for our homeless and unhoused population. Again, in addition, it's not done by any means. You know, our team is very bullish in collaborating and securing grant funding. In collaboration with the county, we were successful in securing an encampment resolution grant, which provides some additional resources for our navigation center operation, our BWAL operation, and some additional support for our police services. So we're always thinking outside the box, and I know from my perspective, and all the city managers in Orange County are always sharing best practices to do better. And you're right, it takes all of us to deliver the solution, and thank you again for your time and your input earlier.
Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Kim. You know, I should say that, you know, one of the things we heard loud and clear in the ad hoc was, you know, especially from our city managers, not one city should shoulder all of this. And it's unfair to the constituencies and your city councils to do that. And we understand that very clearly. That's why I think hopefully we kind of grow out of this even need for a cold weather shelter at some point. At some point, if we have enough navigation centers and shelters, this becomes a thing of the past where there will be capacity to be able to absorb all of our neighbors who are unhoused going through extreme weather conditions. So, you know, that's really the goal. We're not there yet, so I feel like we're almost in a transitional period where we're moving away from the old model of having, you know, one, you know, freestanding site where the entire county uses to more of a network, and eventually, hopefully, it just, you know, falls off, and we can use the funding that we use for cold weather shelters for other services. So that's really the goal. We're getting there. I think we're doing, you know, something incremental, but this is that, I guess, you know, piece of that path that we need to address. So thank you for those comments.
One more comment, if it's
Sure.
okay. So in response to Commissioner Kim's feedback, which is great, you know, out of the 34 cities, of course, now I guess 4 of us may have housing authorities now that Irvine's sort of falling into that category. The rest of the money comes through the county, so we haven't yet figured out how to partner effectively to figure out how to make all of that work to get the funds to flow correctly. So we know what resources are available, and as I've worked with a number of cities, had great pushback of how do we know when we step up that, you know, how the funding is going to come from. So we need to continue to figure that out now. I mean, basically, we can't wait until we need cold weather shelter to figure out how we provide that extra funding. I think that's a challenge that we could step up to and figure out. I don't think it's impossible. We just have to figure it out. I think that's critically important. And we could put some of the other programs in place that ahead of time. I mean, I think Garden Grove that is terrific and much appreciated. I do agree that we always have the challenge of we can't have everything in every city because it just isn't practical to provide the services as the way it's done. But we also can't have every city, you know, saying not here, right? So there's somewhere we have to make that all work together. And we have to do that. I think the other opportunity that we need to continue, we brought up to follow up what earlier, as you said, we hope we grow out of the need, but that means that when we put people in the shelters and these opportunities, we need to have it to be a much more pleasant experience than they expected it to be, so that they're not that their preference to live on the street because they feel like that's better than the shelter can be overcome. And we've it will take some effort for us to overcome that, where they find out that that shelter is not as a negative experience as they worry that it will be. And we need to continue to work on that. That's the only way we will get out of the need for these emergency shelters, is to make the shelters acceptable places to be until they can move on to more permanent housing.
Agreed. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Hurst.
I think it'd be helpful for the commission to know what the countywide shelter bed utilization rate is in the scheme of considering service gaps. That may be something that was discussed before my time in this space, but I know obviously Salvation Army's anti-emergency shelter utilization, and some idea of some of the others, but not really a holistic picture. We know some bed count capacity, but really utilization is probably the more important number to tell us, as we hit cold weather in Anaheim, if my shelter has 25 empty beds, that's something pretty important to this discussion. So in the future, maybe an update on what that is, even calendared, could be meaningful, that discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Utilization's so important because, for obvious reasons, if we have open beds in our year-round system, we should be using those first before we're adding on resources. With that being said, speaking very specifically to getting that data, this is something our office is starting to work on, so we can speak to utilization of the 2 county shelters, and we have access to data for a decent amount of the other shelters in HMIS, although that information we're still trying to suss out. But I think I'd be excited to work with the appropriate shelters, because we do have a large network, but really when you're talking on this topic, you're talking about the shelters specifically serving single adults or adult families. So yeah, the one you guys have in Anaheim, Santa Ana, Huntington Beach, Garden Grove. So I think this is something, I appreciate that, and maybe something we could, my office can work with the appropriate stakeholders to see how we could look at that data and potentially report on. If I could add one more thing, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that really came out of, at least for me, out of the ad hoc is a reminder that there are a variety of ways to prepare for and address inclement weather. It's not just a big armory. And additionally, as I've spoken to more and more cities and stakeholders, those cities and communities and nonprofits are doing a variety of those options. So I think one of the things I'll say that our office has learned is in our approach, especially moving forward to cities and to other partners, is really highlighting that there is an understanding that there's more than one way to do this, and we want to recognize and support different models, not just around sheltering, but preparation and things to that nature. And more importantly, that we recognize that there's efforts that are already happening, and our interest is in supporting and enhancing those. So we don't come to the table saying, yeah, you guys haven't done anything. We're here to, call you to task and get you to finally do something. Absolutely not. That is not the message we're interested in sending, because it's not an accurate message. But it's really, hey, as we go, even here around this table, everyone speaks to the variety and strong efforts being made in their communities in slightly different ways. And we want to make sure, especially with this inclement weather response and trying to partner and come up with solutions, that those cities and partners understand that when we come to the table, we're open. And we're excited to hear what's going on and what might be able to, be enhanced or created in the future.
Great, thank you for that. Seeing no other comments, anybody from the ad hoc wish to comment any further? Sounds like we had a pretty good explanation of what we're doing, and I know Mr. Beck will report back to us on that. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the presentation section, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to the clerk to read the next item.
Item 3 is a presentation titled 2024 Point in Time Count Summary, presented by Doug Beck, Director of the Office of Care Coordination, and we have no request from the public to speak on this item.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development requires that all continuum of care jurisdictions across the nation complete a biannual unsheltered count and an annual sheltered count of all persons experiencing homelessness in the community on a single point in time during the last 10 days of January. The County of Orange and the Orange County Continuum of Care conducted the sheltered count on the night of Monday, January 22nd, 2024, and the unsheltered count took place over 3 days, Tuesday, January 23rd, 2024 through January 25th, 2024, to ensure the 800 square mile Orange County jurisdiction was canvassed effectively. The 2024 point in time count data collected participant level information, including household compositions, subpopulations, disabling conditions information, and demographic factors. The presentations will provide a summary of these findings, and at this time I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Beck to go ahead and do the presentation.
Thank you again. So I'm going to try to be as quick and efficient with this as possible to really allow time for questions. But I want to make sure I hit some of the important points. I know many of you, if not all of you, have had a chance to see the point in time, the 2024 point in time count results since we've published them, I believe, May 11th, if memory serves me right. So we're about 5-6 weeks, these results have been public. And I say I want to go through them quickly. I'm not going to hit every point. One of the things that's really valuable and interesting about the point in time count is there's so many data points around so many different topics that I figure I'd cover the basics, and then, like with many of the presentations I do around this, allow the group to go in the direction that they'd like. First, I want to just really thank everyone in the room and all of our partners outside of the room. Doing a point in time count is ultimately a year-long effort, and our office, as the administrative entity of the COC, as a reminder, this is a COC exercise. It's not necessarily a county exercise. The county conducts it because we're the COC administrative entity. We lead it, but CityNet is our project lead that plays such a critical role. And then the 6 to 7 months leading up to the point in time count, we work with every city throughout Orange County and so many of the stakeholders. The cities provide incredibly important information about what's going on in their cities, and then invaluable resources during the count. Nonprofits, have staff volunteer, which is so incredibly important. Donations come in. So it is a true community lift here where when we're talking about just specifically the exercise of the point in time count, it's a big lift. And in terms of the exercise of the point in time count, each year we should really celebrate achieving it. And then we get on to the results. So real quickly, we always mark, this is our third time using the exact same methodology. As always said, point in time counts are probably the most important takeaway, understanding that any census or survey has some percentage of error. The high level, if there's one thing to take away, is really looking at the trends. So we now have 3 years to sort of see which direction we're going in. As a reminder, our survey-based model follows all and aligns with all national best practices. And then this year we had the highest number of volunteers, and that's really important to mention. And so many of them are either professionals or returners, making the quality of the canvassing and surveying being done, I believe, that much better. So The overall number is 7,322. This represents a 28% increase from 2022. It's a large increase from 2022. As many of you remember, our 2022 results showed a 17% decrease from 2019. So we sort of dip as we reached, and then we've now seen a rise. If you look at that over 5 years, and take the 5-year trend, it comes out to about a 7% increase over a period of 5 years, taking into consideration the dip and increase we've seen over the last 2 counts. Our unsheltered numbers went up 37% from 2022, while our sheltered numbers went up 18% from 2022. Our unsheltered numbers went up 5% over the last 5 years, and our sheltered numbers went up 9%. So some of the initial questions, we ask ourselves when we look at this data is, okay, how are we doing compared to previous time periods, comparable communities? And this slide gives us a sort of a peek into that. And so much of, any point in time count data provides you with a lot of answers, but even more questions. So if we look here, I've already mentioned that over the last 5 years, if you take the 5-year span, we're seeing a 7% increase. When you compare that to surrounding counties, when I say surrounding counties, I mean our 4 neighboring counties. Over the last 4 years, they've seen a 29% increase. So we're obviously well below that trend. With that being said, as you see here, we're looking at 2023 data for our neighboring counties in the state. There has been some communities have also announced their results over the last couple of weeks. Some have not, so that's why we've kept it the way we have it here, because we don't have a complete data set for 2024. When you look at the whole state of California, over that 4-year period, the state has seen a 20% increase, and yet again, we're a little above a third of that rate. Yeah, I think a lot of us attribute that to the value and the importance of the homeless service system that we've created over those 7 years, and as the a primary reason for having a slower increased trend line during that time. I think it's also important to mention how a point-in-time count, especially when you're comparing them, really what they tell you is if the number increases, that means more people entered the system than exited homelessness, and if it decreased, more people exited homelessness than came into homelessness. So with that being said, looking at our increase, it's another reminder that our system, one that I think a lot of us are proud of, that helps people exit homelessness on a daily basis, is being outpaced by the amount of folks falling into homelessness, and that's a really important takeaway. Here provides some perspective year to year in relationship to each particular, each year looking at total unsheltered, sheltered. When we look at our special, our subpopulations that we look at each time, we saw an increase in each of these populations. Back in 2022, the only population we saw an increase in was the seniors. But as we look at the data today, we see a 21% increase in seniors over the last 2 years. We see a 31% increase of transition-age youth over the last 2 years, and a 5% increase in veterans over the last 2 years. So, we're seeing an increase across the board. When we look at things on a SPA level, specifically the unsheltered, both the unsheltered and sheltered count, we saw the greatest increase overall, increased numbers in the North SPA, and then the Central SPA, and then the South SPA. What I like to point out here, one of the is, very interestingly, when you look at those veteran numbers in the middle there, the veteran number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness went up from our 2024 count, which was, our 2022 count, which was by 71%. But the number of veterans in our shelter system that are experiencing homelessness went down. So what I like to do is sort of point out some stats that I see when I look at this that make me not only scratch my head a little bit, but more importantly, want to dive a little deeper into. But essentially what we're seeing is that the veterans number has not only gone up, but the percentage of those veterans experiencing unsheltered homelessness has gone up as well. And, which is counter to, the goal, obviously, of our system, and I think a surprise for many of us. As we look at household status, so this slide, the real focus is that families bar, the families row in the middle there. We've counted 347 families overall during the point in time count. That is an 11% decrease from the amount of families we counted in 2022. So that's encouraging. And 685 children who are in those families is a 4% reduction in the number that we saw in 2022. So encouraging. We also know family homelessness especially sees so many different faces, and I know a lot of my colleagues who spend most of their time in the family homeless sector here, I think rightfully so, state that the point in time count is an incredibly important marker here, and we want to celebrate the decrease, but at the same time, doesn't always capture perfectly the what's being seen day in and day out and the challenges that families face when it comes to housing and homelessness. Let's see, there we go. We also looked at ties, like we always do. What we saw, what's interesting here is that when we compare our ties data from 2019 to 2024, we didn't look at it the same way in 2022, so that's why I'm comparing it to 2019. The percentages are almost identical to each of the questions. So reported, for the folks who stated that that they spent most of their time homeless, most of their time while experiencing homelessness in Orange County. That number, as you can see, is 92%. That was 92% back in 2019. It was a little higher in our 2023 homeless survey. Then when you look last permanent address, 76%. Back in 2019, I think it was 74%. When you look at our 2023 survey, it was 75%. And then as we look at folks who have family in Orange County, it was 51%, which is, I think, almost identical to what we saw in 19. Same with working or have ever worked in Orange County. All this is to say that although our population, the overall number is fluctuating, we're not seeing any different trends in folks coming in to Orange County from outside at a greater or slower rate. When we look at it from this lens, we're seeing the same activity as what we saw previously and consistently. Let's see, 48.33%. That number up there in the middle, but really the top right. Want to point that out. 48% of folks, almost half the folks that were surveyed, stated that they were experiencing homelessness for the first time in the past 12 months, which is really interesting, especially when we do the count every 2 years. So in the last year, a year ago, half of these folks were not experiencing homelessness. So yet again, a data point that's really telling. I think it continues to speak to the need of prevention and prevention of all kinds, but it also speaks to the importance of us looking at this data point more closely. Subpopulation data, we do our best to present it the same year in and year out. What I'll point out with this slide is that the chronic homelessness, this is unsheltered. This represents people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Every year we ask about these same subpopulations and disabling conditions. Chronic homeless number is really interesting, both in the point in time count and anywhere else we've looked at that number. All we've seen in the last couple of years is that percentage is increasing, increasing, and increasing. Here, what we see is that in 2024, 38% of folks qualified as experiencing chronic homelessness under HUD's definition. That is a 18% dip from, or a 17% dip from 2022. So I'm interested to see if, is this the start of a downward trend, which would be great. You know, we've put a lot more permanent supportive housing has come on board in the last 2 years that addresses chronic homelessness. Our shelters have focused on getting people with long-term homelessness in there and vulnerabilities. So that would help support this number. Or is this an anomaly? So a number I'll be looking at. The other one that I think worth looking at is that, or worth noting, they're all worth looking at, is the HIV/AIDS, people living with HIV and AIDS. Although we're talking about really small percentages, 2 years ago, 52 people reported living with HIV and AIDS. 40 more people reported that in 2024, which is obviously a significant percentage jump. So yet again, another point worth looking at. And when you look at that number as well, it's actually a larger jump when we look at those same numbers in our shelter. That bottom line, 77 people reported it living with HIV and AIDS in 2022, 175 this go round, almost, over 2.5 the times of that. So something really interesting to look at. Breakdown of SPA numbers, showing, the difference year over year per each SPA. We can look a little bit more at that. Let's see my clicker. Likes this slide. Oh, there we go. And then we'll land on this is my final slide. And we've spoken to this throughout the meeting and throughout every meeting. But, so another thing that us at the county looked at immediately when we got the data was our shelter system. As I think a lot of you experience and know, there's often these debates about, hey, is shelter valuable? What is it doing? Is it just warehousing folks? We need to permanently house individuals. And I think we all agree that, homelessness only ends with someone in a home. And a shelter is not a home, but it takes some time. And our shelter system is incredibly important. And we also see through the data that people move into homes much faster when they're living in a shelter than when they're working with someone on the street. So all that to say, what we looked at was what's going on in our shelters. And we took data from one specific day of our 2 shelters, Yale and Bridges, which Yale is 425 beds, Bridges is 200 beds. So you're talking about a pretty large sample size there. What we saw on that particular day was that 72% of the, I think it was somewhere around 580 to 600 people that were in the shelter on that day, 72% were on the CES community queue. And what that means for those of you that don't live in this every day is that 72% of the people in shelter had, at that moment, had done everything they needed to do in order to be ready to accept a housing placement. That means they worked with their case managers. They got their paperwork together. They got identification. They got everything they needed so that if they were presented with a housing opportunity, to say, yep, I'm ready for it, which is great news. It means that the, shelters are, essentially getting folks ready to move on to permanent housing. The challenge is when we looked at how many of those 72% actually had a match to housing and were waiting to move in, only 1 out of every 12 people of those 72% on that day were matched to housing. That doesn't mean that those 11 others are not going to get matched to housing eventually, but it speaks to the logjam that we have. We have folks that are interested and willing to move into housing, but we as a community just do not have the housing to put them in. And, which speaks so strongly to the need for not only us building more permanent supportive housing, but it supports the importance of looking into tiny homes and all of the other different solutions around permanent housing. The other thing I like to point out is that essentially the one out of the 72% represented roughly like 470 people, I think. 11 out of every 12 of them, that gets you to somewhere around like 400 to 410, but let's use the 400. That means that there's 400 people on that day in our shelter that if we had somewhere to go, we could put them in their own home, which would then open up 400 additional beds to move people into our shelter and really help accelerate them out of homelessness. So those are all things, obviously, to think about. I'm interested in opening up opening it up. The last thing I'll mention is as we, something to remember when we move on to our next presentation around the homeless death review. So many of the folks that have passed away over the last several years, such a high percentage of them have passed away on our streets, and a much lower percentage of those folks have passed away in our shelters. So shelter and housing is so incredibly important. So this particular statistic has so many different implications and impacts on our system and on the people we're serving in our system. So we always try to end there. And with that, I'll pass it back to the chairman.
Thank you for that, Doug. Thank you for the presentation. I think all of us have become familiar with the statistic and the actual numbers, but it's always good to kind of go a little bit more profoundly and deeper on some of these findings of the study. So let me go ahead and bring it back to the commission for any questions, comments on this. Commissioner Parks.
Where are we with vouchers? I mean, so of the 400 or so, is it, I know obviously we have a shortage of housing, but are there vouchers available these days? I'm not quite as up to speed.
So I'd have to lean on my colleague Julia, who's here, but I'm not going to put her on the spot. But ultimately, for the most part, our vouchers are being used, right? Julia, it's not like we have, all right, thank you. I didn't want to bring you up. But yet you did. Yes. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Julie Bidwell, Director, OC Housing Community Development. Yes, so our housing choice vouchers are fully utilized. Obviously, our Board of Supervisors approved using sort of a 50-50 split between a tenant-based voucher and project-basing those vouchers. We obviously opened up our waiting list last September, 57,000 applications in a 2-week period. But we selected randomly a 12,000 person waiting list. We still have to wait for the funding to be able to serve that waiting list. But all of our vouchers are currently utilized. Now there are special purpose vouchers that we have that are all tenant-based for the most part, except for the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Voucher for homeless veterans. We do have some project-based vouchers there, but we also have mainstream vouchers for non-elderly disabled individuals. And we're working with Cal Optima. Some of those are about individuals that are frequent flyers in emergency rooms. I just used the wrong word. I know I did. Yeah. And we have other specific, the emergency housing voucher allocation we received was fully utilized. And it was a one-time allocation of vouchers. So as people get off of that program, our number of vouchers shrinks. So it was very interesting versus the Housing Choice Voucher program where we can take a turnover voucher and give it to somebody else. So I feel I've covered all of our vouchers. We do have some special purpose vouchers where we have availability, but you have to meet certain criteria. And then on our regular Housing Choice Voucher program, it's fully utilized.
So that's great, Julia, and I wouldn't doubt that everything is going. I was just curious too, is our community could use more vouchers or more funding for more vouchers?
Yeah, Sue, thank you for saying more funding for more vouchers. Sue's an A+ student. If you don't know, we receive allocation of vouchers, but we also receive funding. Whatever we utilize first, and it usually is that we've run out of money. We have a high rent. We pay fair market rents. We run out of money before we can fully utilize all of the vouchers we've been allocated. Right now, have about 800 vouchers we cannot use because we've run out of funding. And right now that amount would need to be another $17 million every year because it's a voucher program, not just $17 million as a one-time, but an annual shortfall of $17 million a year to unlock those 800 vouchers.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Would it be helpful,
Commissioner Davis?
Would it be helpful to have her come back at some point and kind of go through voucher, like what it means for a special purpose voucher, tenant-based voucher? Because I don't know if everyone understands.
It's a great point, Commissioner. So Julia, you've just been recruited to come back. You don't have to, or do, yeah, you don't have to come back now, right at this point.
Oh.
But just to come back in the future to give us maybe a more expanded sort of, background on vouchers and how the authority breaks it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to. I know City Manager Kim has a housing authority in Garden Grove, and do we have Anaheim and Santa Ana? Would love to invite all of us to come. And I certainly could take the lead on giving that overview.
That'd be great. So we'll do that. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and have Julia back to give us a more expanded recitation of vouchers, all things vouchers. Yes, Commissioner Bruno Nelson.
Thank you, Doug, for the presentation. I have a couple of comments. First off, I know we look at these numbers, and our first thought or our first feeling is we're not happy because the numbers are going up. But I do want to point out that I think these numbers show movement. And I think that that's important to see. When we look at 48% of folks falling into homelessness for the first time during this count, and our numbers not, it shows that we're doing something, we're moving, we're building a system. And so I think that that's important to acknowledge. But it does support what Doug said, is that our system is simply not large enough, and that the folks that are falling into homelessness are outpacing what our system is able to provide. Cal Ultimate Health has put a lot of money, and we're so excited to partner with many of you around this table to help build that system out. And I think we've made a lot of good progress, and I think we have more progress to make. That being said, we have to do our own algorithm and determine from our perspective and our data how many of our members are homeless. And I want to say this because I want us to recognize that this is a point-in-time count. It's not how many unhoused individuals reside in our county. It's how many were experiencing homelessness on that particular night. Our algorithm that we do, we have to look over a 6-month period and say how many of our members have fallen into homelessness over that 6-month period. And I can assure you it is far greater than what this number shows. And what that represents is the fact that those that live here, our members, are falling in and out of homelessness over and over again. And one night does not necessarily represent that reality. So when we look at our system and we look at what we need to build and what we need to build it to, we would be falling short if we thought we needed to build it to a 7,000 number, because that's not large enough. Again, I think we're making good progress, and I think the more we know, the better we can provide, and it's with that spirit that I share that information.
Great comments. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Wyatt.
Yes, a couple comments. Again, thank you, Doug, for getting the report out and reviewing it with us. My first look at the 48%, falling into homelessness, right? We did not report that number in our 2022 summary report. So, and we never did a full report that year. So that's one thing we might go back and revisit too. But we were 42% in 2019, as I recall, and we looked at that and the rate of what we have to do on the housing side if we can't reduce that number, becomes pretty daunting, I would say. And so Sue, I hope your prevention program proves result, because we really have to bring that number down, right? If we can't shave 5%, a year off of that number, with programs, then we can't get to where, the housing we can provide actually works. I've modeled this out a dozen different ways to look at what we have to do, but you really have to shave that. I mean, the biggest leverage we have, and unfortunately, our Prop 1, presentation, from a couple of meetings ago said that they've cut back on prevention funding, and yet prevention is the most economical and most effective thing we could do. So we have to look at overcoming that overall issue. So with this data too, I guess my other comment is now as we start to put it together, I want to make sure that we actually produce a full report. Doug, I don't know what your plans are for doing that. We didn't do it in 2022. We just felt we didn't have the resources or something to produce the full report. And I'd also, of course, love to be able to cut the data more ways. We pushed on getting more data and how much more useful it would be to trend it in more ways. So I'm hoping that we will find a way to make the data available to be, cut and summarized in more ways. For these 3 point-in-time counts that we've done with the same data collection methodology, it would be very helpful to be able to cut them in a variety of more ways and do some more understanding of the data. And I don't know, I'd just like some input on what your thoughts are on that, Doug.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. So HUD requires a specific report, and they, so there's really, so as I've mentioned, this point-in-time count is a HUD-required exercise, and they are the sort of dictate what's required. And we have submitted that report like almost every community has by the deadline, which was May 10th. All of the stuff you see up here and through our reports over the years is things that we do extra. So the full report that you're referencing is we did a really thorough shake of the data in 2019. We weren't able to do that in 2022. We're still exploring our ability to do that here in 2024. Our COC team, I mean, is a very small team, and I think, we try to do our best to share the most pertinent data. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to provide as comprehensive of a report as we did in 2019. With that being said, we've shared data. It's helpful when we have a specific data request, then we're able to, when it comes with exactly what's being looked for. We've shared a lot of data with cities, and we continue to be open to that. So yeah.
There are probably resources available that could do that. That doesn't require your small team to do that. We have to work through the legal, NDA and other issues with that. But I think it's worth pursuing ways to make that data available without overburdening the organization. And certainly I would volunteer to help do that. My background lends itself heavily to that. And I know I have a neighbor right here, a couple down who data is important too. I've gotten, the United Way, people in homelessness have talked about getting their hands on the data. So I think there are a few different organizations that we could pull together and maybe find a way to do that. And whatever we would need to do to not disclose it inappropriately, we could probably figure out and then report that back to help with that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rios-Vos.
So a couple of things. One is I think as we're looking at the point in time, it is important to also think about all of the other data and reports that we've received that give us a more comprehensive view that could probably get us at how do we project out what we need to be thinking about, because the one point in time is almost never going to get us everything we need to understand about ending homelessness. So if there's a way to maybe, again, develop a plan that helps us take all of the various reports we've looked at and start to extrapolate some kind of a narrative about what being homeless in Orange County looks like. I think that could be helpful, not just for the Commission and homelessness, but also on the COC side. So that was one point I wanted to make. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is the chair of the COC has asked each of the committee members to take this information back to our committees and explore data points and to really have a conversation around what pertinent questions we have around the point in time, and then bring that back to, I believe we're bringing it back to our August meeting, but initial dialogue is really around understanding how the information is being gathered, but then what else we would need to know to be able to affect change. So.
Okay.
Commissioner Kim.
If we're talking about ideas, I'm just going to plant the seed. For the city of Garden Grove, the 22 freeway bisects the city east-west. And so if there's a way for us to identify those individuals that are unsheltered and counted on state right-of-way, it allows us that information to really continue our collaboration with the state agencies, including Caltrans. We've been very successful in that conversation, and I think those data points are helpful in providing that little bit of information. The count is already done. It's just those that are within the state right-of-way would be helpful for us.
Yeah, real quick. I appreciate both of the last comments because they speak to, the COCs and many of the city's efforts to say, okay, what does this point in time count tell us? How does it support, what we're doing? How does it change what we're doing? And really utilizing it as an additional set of data, not the only set of data, to use to shape our system and to understand how effective our system is, but also really importantly, utilizing the data to really think moving forward instead of, at times I think we get a little too entrenched in arguing about the exact figures of each point of it, where the real value in this is what is it telling us, and what is it telling us, and are we listening in a way that helps us shape our system moving forward?
Thank you. Any other questions or remarks from the commission? So thank you for all the remarks on this item, and I especially want to agree with Commissioner Bruno Nelson. This is a moment. I was sitting with Judge Carter yesterday, and we were having breakfast, and he was talking to me about his experience in LA County, which makes me realize our problem here is much more manageable than what some counties have to deal with. So I do think it's something that we can address. It's a solvable one. It's one that we can, I think, really impact if we do things well. But I do want us to consider what happened in 2022. Why did the numbers drop? That should give us some indicator as to where we went from 19 to 22 and see what was in play then. We know the pandemic was winding down, and there were, I think, things there that we could learn as lessons. Like there were tenant protections, there were vouchers available, there were different things that kept people housed in a moment of crisis. So if those things were employable then, and they really did reduce the numbers from 2019 to 22, maybe those are the same things that once you're removed, it makes us trend upwards again. here in '24. So just something for us to think about, and that's why the preemption or the preemptive efforts that we were trying to employ through the stabilization pilot program. And I want to give a shout out to Supervisor Chafee, because he just dedicated $1 million of his discretionary monies towards rental assistance in his district. So we're identifying things that, again, to what I think one of the comments that was made, how do we prevent people from even becoming homeless? And that will help us hopefully flatten that curve a little bit more. But I think a lot of what was said here today, is really valuable. I think, to the extent we can have some specific requests on metrics that, are needed, that would be helpful, because I think that's something that I think the team could tackle rather than doing many, but just all of us here saying, what is it that we're missing? What are we not seeing in the data that's being provided? At the very least, I'm sure that's something that the COC team could provide. But I just want to thank you all for doing that, and for your comments, and thank you, Doug, for your presentation. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to the clerk for the reading of the next item.
Item 4 is a presentation titled Homeless Death Review Committee Report on 2022 Homeless Deaths, presented by Kelly Estrada, Assistant Chief Deputy Coroner. And we have no request from the public to speak on this item.
Great. And before I turn it over to Ms. Estrada, so in January 2022, Sheriff Coroner Don Barnes announced his intent to commission the county's first Homeless Death Review Committee to analyze the number of deaths and causes of death for persons experiencing homelessness in Orange County. The sheriff commissioned the committee through the Orange County Coroner Division within the County of Orange Sheriff's Department. The Homeless Death Review Committee is comprised of technical experts from both the public and private sectors, and throughout the past year has reviewed and analyzed data related to deaths of persons experiencing homelessness in the calendar year 2022. The goal of the committee was to utilize the data to uncover potential trends related to the causes of death, which would lead to either service and/or policy recommendations that may help prevent future deaths among the homeless population. At this time, I'll ask Assistant Deputy Chief Coroner Kelly Estrada to do the presentation. Or is it going to be
I'm going to
Ray?
kick it
okay,
off,
Ray.
and then we'll hand it over to Kelly. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the members of the commission for having us here today to share this report. As the chairman said, this was a product of the commission. The Homeless Death Review Commission that was formed by the sheriff in January 2022. And really, he made the decision to form this based on the fact it was pointed out to him that this kind of mortality review committee is a recommended best practice of the National Healthcare for Homeless Council. And there's a lot of jurisdictions that have done this, and knowing that we had seen some increases in our homeless death in Orange County, the sheriff felt it was appropriate for him to form this this committee. We have a death review committee for several other areas that the coroner's office looks at: child death review, elder deaths and abuse. And so it's really based on that format. Multiple stakeholders are a part of it. And really the goal is to look at preventable deaths and maybe what we could do to reduce the number of preventable deaths among our homeless population. So this is our second report that we're going to share with you, and I know it's been provided in your packets. One thing I just wanted to point out was in our first 2 years that we've done this, we did a report on 21 deaths. Today we're going to be talking about 2022 deaths. One thing as we started as a committee, there was an inability to share some of the data to do a deep, in-depth dive, case-by-case dive on the homeless deaths. So we felt it was important to pursue legislation to allow us to do that in-depth data share as a committee. And we worked with Assemblywoman Sharon Quirk Silva, who authored legislation, and that was signed into law at the end of 2023, took effect January of this year. And so our reports going forward, we're hopeful that we'll be able to share more data, do more of an in-depth dive on homeless deaths. So what we've done in 2021 and what we'll share with you today is more based on aggregate data. So one of the leaders of our coroner division, Kelly Estrada is here, and she's going to walk you through that right now.
Thank you. So as mentioned, I'm just here to give you sort of an overview of the information that is contained in the report. Again, you all, I believe, have a copy of it in your agenda. But starting off with a snapshot of the overall numbers of deaths of persons experiencing homelessness in Orange County. In 2022, the total number of deaths we had was 496. You can see there through the chart over time, beginning in 2009 to 2022, we have had a significant increase, most significant in the years 2020 to 2022, where we had a 47% increase between those years. Not reflected here because, again, this is a 2022 report, but we do have the number now for 2023 deaths, and the total there is 508. So while it is an increase, it is just a 2% increase over the 2022 year, which I believe is favorable, as Doug mentioned, Director Beck, excuse me. The point in time increase for 2022 was about 28%, if I recall correctly. So again, while it is an increase, it is at lower pace than the point in time count shows us. So moving forward, I'll just be breaking this number, this 496, down to you with various metrics that the committee looked at. So starting with race and ethnicity of our decedents, we had 50% of them white, 37% Hispanic, 6% Black, 4% Asian, and 3% other or unknown. These percentages do align with the point in time count of the living homeless population. And moving over to the gender breakdown, we had 86% of our decedents male and 14% female. This percentage does show a slight overrepresentation of the male population by 13% as compared to the point in time count. Breaking this down by age, of our 496 decedents, we had the majority of males in the age range of 50 to 59 at the time of their passing. Females were within the age range of 30 to 39 at the time of their passing. Overall, what this shows us is that the average age of persons experiencing homelessness that died in 2022 in Orange County, average age was 48 years old as compared to the life expectancy of 76 years old for the housed population. Next, I have a breakdown of manners of death, of homeless deaths in Orange County in 2022. For the benefit of the commission, just a brief explanation on what manner of death is. This is essentially the category of the death. Later, I'll get into discussing cause of death. That is the actual reason that somebody passes away. As an example, a cerebral hemorrhage or a brain hemorrhage can be a natural death. Maybe it's a spontaneous stroke. That same cause of death can also be categorized as an accident if it was related to an injury or a traumatic event. So when I speak about cause of death and manner of death, manner is the category that the death fell under. So bringing your attention specifically to the accident and the natural categories, manners of death. Prior to 2018, natural deaths were the predominant category or manner of death of persons experiencing homelessness in Orange County. In 2018, we see a shift there where the accidental deaths became the majority, albeit by a slight majority. It did become the leading category. However, that continues on through 2022. However, if you'll notice, the 65% of accidental deaths in 2022 compared to 26%, excuse me, of natural deaths in 2022, that disparity becomes much larger. And as I show you later, the causes of death, that does seem to be driven largely by drug trends and the fentanyl crisis. So this is a quick visual representation of each manner of death. Here we're showing accidental injury death trends, again with a significant increase starting in 2020 and continuing to increase through 2022. Next, I have the natural deaths. Again, continuing to increase there in orange, we have designated deaths related to COVID-19 starting in 2020 with the pandemic. And moving on to the homicide and suicides, which do increase, but there is some variable there. And I just like to point out how small of a percentage this is of our 496. We're talking about less than 20 cases in each category per year. So as I mentioned earlier, we did break that down further into causes of death. So for persons experiencing homelessness in Orange County that died in 2022, the top 5 leading causes of death, by a large majority, 65% of those were accidental deaths, followed by 14% diseases of the heart or cardiac-related deaths, 4% being intentional self-harm, 3% related to chronic liver disease or cirrhosis, and less than 2% being related to assault. So again, those are the top 5 leading causes of death. That first category of accident being so significant, we've broken that down even more to separate the different causes. And you can see the top 2 lines there are predominantly drug-related deaths, making up that about 55%. So 209 deaths of the homeless population in Orange County were those that died of a drug overdose where fentanyl was detected. 64 also died of a drug overdose, however, fentanyl was not detected in those cases. Moving beyond that, the third leading cause of death in the county is related to pedestrian traffic fatalities. Another metric that the committee looked at was whether or not the person, the decedent rather, had a previous episode in custody. We found that 342 did have a previous episode in custody. That represents 68% of total deaths, while 154 or 32% did not. Beyond that, we also looked into when the most recent custody episode occurred in relation to their death. And out of the 496 that died in 2022, 114 of those had a custody episode within the year of their death in 2022. Looking beyond that into the length of time that they spent in custody, the large majority of those 97 cases spent 1 day or less in custody during their last custody episode. Beyond that, the vast majority, 56% served a week or less, while 75% served 30-day or less. So while there was a majority that did spend time in custody, these days seem to be short in time, which limits the opportunity for participation in any treatment or programming. And lastly, the committee reviewed of the decedents we had, how many of those had eligibility information for CalOptima. We found that 59%, or 294 of the decedents did have eligibility information, while 41% did not. Of those with coverage, there were 524 emergency room visits and 123 hospitalizations.
And just to conclude and follow up with that, so the committee, as you'll see in your packet, does indicate what their findings are. And going forward next year, as we look at 2023, we'll do a more in-depth dive on those homeless deaths. And, you know, one thing I think, and it's noted in different places in the report, but that keep in mind this is 2022, and even during calendar year 2022 and since then, there's been a number of different things that have been done that'll be interesting to see. CalOptima street medicine teams have come on board since that time, and the county's done a lot more to get naloxone out into different places since that time. So really just interesting things to note and see how see the impact as we move forward. But that's essentially what we have to report, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Grangoff, and thank you, Ms. Estrada, for that presentation. Let me bring it back to the commission if there's any questions or comments on the presentation. Yes, Commissioner Cunningham.
Thank you, Chairman. Clearly, we need to get our unhoused off the streets, and I'm assuming that we have data of the cities that people passed away in as well?
Yes, ma'am. If you look at the last, I believe the last page, there's an appendix, and it shows the cities that each of those were in.
Okay, great, because I think it would be interesting for us, especially my colleagues on the Tiny Home Ad Hoc Committee, to take that data from each city, try to understand where our unhoused passed away, to really look at the data to figure out how many possible tiny homes do we need to build quickly to get people off the streets and into safety before we can build permanent housing. So I would challenge our commission to look at that because I'm horrified. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Hurst?
I also think there seems to be an obvious link here between substance use disorder trouble. We noticed in Doug's great presentation, it almost doubled in the unsheltered homeless from 2019 to this latest point in time. And then the data we're just getting on these, the deaths, I think there's a challenging opportunity here to make a big impact if we can focus our resolution and creativity in that space and see how the commission might really amplify substance use disorder responses in the homeless space. I think that would produce some real impact.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Vice Chair.
Just a quick comment, just to reiterate what the chairman said earlier about putting resources in play. I'm just looking at the natural death in 2021. It's, aside from COVID, it dropped pretty significantly, right? And so it kind of, when we put the right resources into play, what can we really do that will change a situation for people? And I think substance use is also connected to coping mechanisms as well. So, it's very connected, and so we need to put the right resources into play. I think we can really reduce the number of deaths.
Thank you for that. Mr. Beck.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. I am part of the Homeless Death Review Committee, and I really appreciate, the coroners and the sheriff's effort around this particular exercise. There's a real interest in understanding exactly what's going on around people passing away while homeless. I did mention briefly during the point in time count presentation, as part of the committee figuring out what data, what we can share and how we can share information better. As that's been going on, the coroner's been sharing with our office the names of the folks passing away for really about, I guess, the last 2 years. And essentially what our office has been doing is looking those folks up in our two databases, HMIS and SOCDIS, to understand if they're touching our systems. And what I mentioned before is worth mentioning again. What we've seen is, as we've flushed through the data the first time, is that less than 10% of the people who have passed away were living in shelter at the time they passed away. When we look at the point in time count, that's folks that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness are far overrepresented in the deaths, meaning shelter it's doing something. And I think, like so many aspects of homelessness, it's not just a one thing, like, oh, it's just shelter. It's just the mere fact that shelter is there is preventing death. But it's worth noting the stark contrast. And as we move forward, we will be able to share that information with the coroner and the sheriff's department to include that in this report. And we've thought a lot about this, especially when it comes to those substance use deaths. Shelter obviously provides an atmosphere where there's more folks around. It's an environment that's much more drug-free. I say much more drug-free because no environment's totally drug-free. But there's also, as we think more about it, folks that are interested in going into shelter, that usually means they're interested in doing a handful of things to, improve their situation. So, that also takes into play folks that, not only I'm interested in going into shelter, but I might also be interested in reducing my substance use. So all these things play a really important factor, but it's interesting that so few of them not only passed away, so few people passed away while in shelter. There was a small percentage. The percentage wasn't much bigger when you looked at people with history of shelter that had passed away. But then you layer that on top of some of the data around incarceration, where a significant amount of folks were incarcerated or had a history of incarceration, but a significant amount of those folks also, their last incarceration was for a very small period of time. So they're hitting our systems in these sporadic, small ways. And how do we, as a community and a system, for lack of a better word, catch these folks? So, I am excited that they came today to present and excited for this group to continue to be a part of that discussion. So.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'll just wind up by saying I appreciate the numbers, the data, the presentation, and looking at the 2023 numbers. I guess the only thing we can take some solace in is knowing that that change from 2022 to 23 wasn't as significant a jump as we've seen in some of the previous years. So maybe we take some comfort in that, and hopefully we start seeing a downward trend as we lean into some of these efforts that were mentioned here at the commission. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the clerk. We move now to our action items. Madam Clerk.
Item 5 is a membership recommendation, including membership updates, and to approve the recommendation of Cecilia Bustamante Pixa, Senior Director of Community Health Orange County at Providence St. Joseph Hospital, as the hospital representative on the commission to complete the balance of the 2-year term ending December 5th, 2024, and submit the appointment to the Board of Supervisors for final approval. We have no request from the public to speak on this item.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. At our last meeting in April, the Commission to End Homelessness approved the launch of a recruitment process that utilized the existing membership ad hoc to evaluate and make a recommendation for appointment of the hospital representative. The membership recruitment closed on May 24th, 2024, and a total of 3 applications were received by the Office of Care Coordination, and the membership ad hoc met the first week of June to discuss the applicants. After a thorough review, the membership ad hoc recommended Cecilia Bustamante Pixa, Senior Director of Community Health, Orange County at Providence St. Joe's Hospital. I wanted to thank the ad hoc for its work on this and bring it back to the commission for any questions or comments or a motion to move the item. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I motion to move the item.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Madam Clerk, the next item.
Item 6 is to establish an ad hoc to review and evaluate the Commission to End Homelessness bylaws, and we have no requests from the public to speak on this item.
Great, thank you. This is an item that we wanted to bring back to the commission. It is to just kind of revisit what the purpose of this commission is, make sure that we're staying true to what we'd like to see, what we'd like to address, make sure we have all the right folks at the table. Maybe there's an expanded role for some others that maybe should be at this table as well. But it's just one of the moments, I think, for us to be able to just kind of revisit this. And I'd like to put together an ad hoc to maybe take a deeper dive. It's been a while since we've looked at the commission again. I think a lot of good work is being done. A lot of work can be done going forward. So I just wanted to make sure that we take the time to come back and report to the commission on, sort of what we see as a group, what we'd like to tackle going forward. So with that, let me go ahead and open it up to the commission for any comments or questions or remarks. Yes, Commissioner Cunningham. Perfect. First one enrolled. Thank you, Commissioner. And that sounded like a motion as well.
Oh, sure. Is it?
I'll entertain a motion to move the item. And so,
So moved. And then I'll also volunteer, but.
awesome. I love it. So we have a motion and a second on the item. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Madam Clerk, on to the last item.
And item 7 is to approve the revised Commission to End Homelessness 2024 meeting schedule calendar to amend the October meeting date from October 16th, 2024 to October 2nd, 2024. And we have no requests from the public to speak on this item.
Great. I'll bring it back to the commission for any comments or remarks or a motion to move the item.
I'll move the item.
Great. Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. I think now that concludes. Oh, we've got one more. Yes, go ahead. Madam Clerk, if you'll read the last item.
Yes, item 8 is to approve the Commission to End Homelessness minutes from the April 17th, 2024 regular meeting, and we have no requests from the public to speak on this item.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Beck, for catching that for me. Any questions or comments on this item? If not, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. So that was our last item. So that concludes our agenda for today. We will now move to any commissioner comments. Any comments? Yes, Commissioner Bruno Nelson.
Just a few. Since our last meeting, Cal Optima Health's Board of Directors, of which Supervisor Sarmiento is a member, approved and distributed $25 million for transitional housing, one of which the projects is to create the first family recuperative care ever in the state, much less in Orange County. So we're very excited about that and thankful for the board designating those dollars for that. Keep you updated on all those 6 projects that it funded. And then also on Friday, this Friday, Cal Optima Health is hosting a naloxone distribution event. Given the information that we just received, I think it's very timely. This is free to any nonprofit in the community that would like to receive those supplies. We would like to distribute as much as possible. So please, if you are available, you need that, your members can need that, who you serve, please come by on Friday. We've given out a flyer. I know it went through the COC as well. If anyone would like additional information, I'm here to help.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from the commission? Seeing none, we will now conclude the meeting and adjourn. The next regularly scheduled meeting is for August 21st, 2024 at 1 p.m. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you. A couple meetings we start talking.